Science fiction and art history meet at the center of San Francisco. How appropriate. Now, let me tell you at the outset that this is challenging material. I know you're not going to be surprised by that, and I won't be pulling any punches today. So be prepared. Take notes, ask questions, and above all, as the Buddha might say in this posture, do not fear. So let's jump right in. Wow, the Mac sure makes those brighter than my PC at home. Here are those two paintings that I was referencing a moment ago. On the upper left, you see the Buddhist Lama Tashipel, a 13th century painting, datable via style, iconography, and inscription. And we acquired this back in 2013, so it's one of our most important and most recent acquisitions. On the right, you see the Buddhist Lama Padmasambhava manifesting in his fierce form as Guru Drakpoche. Now, this is a painting with some key 14th century features that was actually created, as we'll see in some detail in the near future, in the 16th century. Now, these two paintings certainly don't look related in any way at first or second or even third glance, but because of the resources of the Asian, we've been able to establish precisely how these two Thangkas are more than related. They represent two termini, two ends, the beginning and the end, of a vast story that is one of the most interesting in Himalayan art history, as I hope you'll agree by the end of our discussion today. Now, the first phase of the story I'm referring to begins in a place which is now in ruins, Taklung Monastery in central Tibet. And where's my little pointer thingy? There it is. These are the ruins in an image taken fairly recently. Now, Taklung Monastery in central Tibet was destroyed by fire in 1548. You may want to keep this in mind. And this is where our Buddhist Lama Tashipel was initially created, at that monastery. Now, the second phase takes place at a monastery called Riwoche in eastern Tibet, destroyed in the Cultural Revolution, but since rebuilt. This is where Tashipel, this painting, was taken and reconsecrated, and it's where our Padmasambhava as Guru Drakpoche was in fact painted itself. Taken together, these two masterworks reveal a fascinating but poorly known artistic and religious continuum whose characteristics are only now being discovered and described. Now, the history of the Taklung artistic tradition and the religious tradition in Tibet and beyond, and over the next couple of hours, I guess about 2 hours, we'll be exploring this continuum, and in particular, how its art transmits Taklung teachings and practice down through time. In other words, how Taklung art engineers a kind of time travel for the teachers and teachings that it depicts and, what is more, embodies. We'll talk about how that works. Now let me give you a little bit of background to the problem, which will initially at least involve a fairly short and direct trip back to about 1995, a puddle jump in comparison with the kinds of art-catalyzed time travel we'll discuss shortly. Now at the time, about 1995, a series of apparently related paintings began to find their way into the global art market. They were identified on the basis of iconography and style, as coming from the Taklung Monastery that you saw the ruins of in the previous slide. Now here you see 3 of these related paintings, or rather 2.5. You see 3 of these related paintings, and along with the figures they depict, you'll see them later in our discussion. Now up to this time, very few of these seemingly related paintings were known, let alone published. One of the very few in the United States at that time was our very own Tashipel, right here, which had been in the collection of Harvard curator Stuart Cary Welch for decades before we acquired it. And here's Stuart Cary right there. Now the subject matter of these Taklung paintings was fairly delimited, was fairly restricted. Several of them depict Tashipel himself, the guy at the center of this painting. and also the first abbot of Taklung Monastery. Others depict a guy named Pekmodrupa, readily recognizable, as I'll show you in just a few minutes, by his trademark mutton chops. And that's actually him right over Tashi Pel's head right there. And if you could get up closely enough, you'd be able to see his mutton chops. When you go into the galleries to look at Tashi Pel, look right over his head, and you'll be able to see those mutton chops there as well. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, the old-timey beard. So you also see Tashi Pel's two successors, here and here. The first one is Kuyalwa. I'll mention him a couple times. And the second one is a gentleman named Sangye Yarjan, who also appears in this body of paintings. And usually these two guys appear together, as they do in the center Thangka in this slide, this one right here. Now, in addition, there's another figure that is maybe of greatest importance in this connection. He's a guy named Onpo, O-N-P-O. He's the fourth abbot of Taklung Monastery, and he is a very prominent presence in this corpus. Now, the last Thangka obviously does not appear in this slide. What you see is a blacked out copy of the central one as a stand-in for a Thangka that I can't actually show. But the principle is the same. Watch how the lineage works. It cascades down from the initial guru down to his successor, this way and this way. So cascades down like that. And the same thing you would see here if I could actually show that image. Just a cascading. So, all things considered, this corpus of paintings consists primarily of Taklung monastic lineage paintings. And the stylistic similarities between these Taklung lineage paintings suggest the existence of at least a distinct style that was developed at Taklung Monastery. The style itself is quite early, and it represents a variation on the Eastern Indian, or Shari in Tibetan, style of painting, which we will explore in the next slide. Bingo. Now, here are two more masterworks from the Asian's own collection, and I hope you are already intimately familiar with them from last year's mini exhibition entitled Enter the Mandala. You probably already know that, in fact, they are the same figure. This is the cosmic Buddha Vairochana, but executed in two very different styles. The style on the left is the classical Indian style. It features dynamic deities interacting with one another. And if you look right here, you'll see that there are really, wrong one. You'll see that there's really no separation. Everybody's all together in the same space. Vairochana's scrolled throne back that you see right here, and that you could see even better in Enter the Mandala. The lively figures interacting with one another. All these are diagnostics of the Indian or Shari style. This Shari style was the very first to enter Tibet, and it decisively informs Thangka art for the next 2 centuries, from about the year 1000 to about the year 1200. Now, compare this Indian or Shari style with the Beiri or Nepalese style on the right. Very different. Here, the subject matter is exactly the same. It's the cosmic Buddha of the center, Vairochana. But note how all the figures are separated from each other in discrete shrine-like spaces. All of these various figures are looking full out forward from the painting. And they're stiff like this. Stiff and hieratic, as opposed to lithe and dynamic. Now, starting in about the year 1200, about the time the monastic consortium in North India fell apart under economic pressure and military pressure at the same time, the Beiri, or Nepalese style, begins to enter Tibet, interact with, and then largely replace the previous Shari style. And by the year 1350, the middle of the 14th century, the resultant Shari-Beiri synergy begins to generate a definitively Tibetan Shari style associated decisively with what monastic order? The Taklung. And this style manifests decisively in the Tashi Pel portrait in our collection, which is on display up in the third floor galleries. Now you'll immediately note that the Taklung version of the Shari style is noticeably different from either of the Vairochana paintings that you just saw. First, note how key elements of the Shari style remain in place. Scrolled throne back, gold throne with turquoise and coral. So some of these things are still there. Also, these stylized rock strata that we'll look at in more detail in a minute, these are a key diagnostic of the Shari style as it unfolds at Taklung Monastery. Oh, actually, let me go ahead and make sure that you're seeing everything here. Here, do you see the turquoise and coral encrusted shrine? The golden shrine with coral, turquoise. Oh, look how much coffee I had. Coral, turquoise. And then here's the back of the shrine, and its upturned edges there and there. And do you see how elaborately scrolled the throne back is? Yet another key diagnostic. So, despite these kinds of continuities between the Shari and the Taklung version that you see right here, despite those continuities, there are major differences in this painting from the Shari that we saw in the previous slide. Yes, in this slide, many of the figures, like this, which we'll look at in more detail in a moment, are quite dynamic and quite animated. However, they're isolated from each other in separate shrines, as we saw with the Nepalese Beiri style. So in some ways, this Taklung style can seem a combination of the Indian and Nepalese styles, and given the date of its creation to about 1250, we'll narrow this down more as we go through the presentation today, it would not be surprising at all that separate influences were beginning to synergize with one another and generate novel forms of artistic expression. But there's something here that's really special, and that's a complete differentiator. Those strange rainbow strata that are both horizontal and vertical, and that demarcate the various shrine-like regions of the painting. These are the Taklung diagnostic. Let me show you them. You see along here? And along here. See all those jewel staves? That is peculiar to the Taklung corpus. Now this, of course, begs the question of exactly how these rock layers, which are diagnostic, function in the context of the Tashi Pel painting that we're looking at right now. And the answer to how they functioned can be explored in the next slide. Here's the answer. The answer is that stylized rock formations, like we just saw, those rainbow staves and such, allow Taklung artists to articulate visionary spaces in an entirely new and deeply layered way, both with respect to visuals and with respect to symbolism at the same time. And the best way to see how this Taklung layering works, surprise, surprise, is to look very closely at an important region of the painting, where we see no less than 5 different visionary spaces in the size in an area the size of a Post-it note, which when you go to look at the painting in the gallery, you'll see how small this actually is. Now, to identify them, let's return to our detail from the upper left quadrant of the painting. First, you see overlapping rock crystals that signify the isolated nature of the mountain fastnesses where visionary experiences become available. So, these are stylized mountain peaks. Now, the mysterious arched structure right here, this one, we'll have to come back to that in just a moment. It appears just inside the multicolored crystal towers, and it's absolutely crucial. I'll get back to it, like I say, in just a moment. Just inside the mysterious arched structure are 2 more layers. A layer of deep blue that stands for emptiness, or shunyata in Sanskrit, and here's a little bitty bit of philosophy. That is the fact that nothing exists inherently or by itself. That's emptiness. And that as a consequence, everything is connected to everything else. Now, nestled right next to the blue arch of emptiness is another arch. This is the rainbow arch of appearance, the equally factual observation that manifold, multicolored objects like you, me, in this room are nonetheless empty of self-existence, yet they still appear. Now, together, the blue and rainbow arches signify the realization that emptiness on the one hand and the appearance of objects on the other are not two things, but rather one thing. And this is of paramount importance for the realization that emptiness and appearance are the same thing equals enlightenment in the Vajrayana tradition. So right here we have a glyph of enlightenment. And the attainment of the state of enlightenment, awakening, bodhi, which is coterminous with Buddhahood and comprises being a Buddha in this tradition. If we move inward still, we get another hint that you saw in more complete form in the previous slide. Tashi Pel sits on that golden shrine throne encrusted with turquoise and coral, and you can see it a little bit better right there. Also, note how Tashi Pel sits face forward, like those two Vairochanas that we just saw in Shadi style and Beatty style. So, taking all of this together, the crystal staves, the blue and rainbow arches that signify awakening, the turquoise and coral shrine, and Tashi Pel's full forward posture, what do all these things indicate? Why are these features here? Very simple. They exist to glyph the idea that Tashi Pel is a virtual Buddha, because he's got all the features. And in fact, Tashi Pel is the very first human to be depicted as a Buddha in the entire Tibetan art tradition. A human who has reached the apex, the ultimate of insight into the nature of reality as emptiness and appearance. Now, of course, you've got a question at this point. How did Tashi Pel get to this place where he could realize that emptiness and appearance are the same thing? Let's see if we can figure it out. Well, here it is. The way he did it is through a sustained series of visionary experiences, which appear in the side columns of this painting, which I've excerpted in this slide. Here, separated by the Taklung crystal towers, here and here and here, separated by the Taklung crystal towers that demarcate visionary space, you can see the content of Tashi Pel's visions. In other words, the visions that led him to his enlightened state. And one of the things that's interesting to me here is that not only did he see these things, but we can see them too in virtue of the artwork, which is pretty interesting in and of itself. Now, on the painting itself, there are 4 visions that appear in portraits of Tashi Pel. They're not always in the same position in the painting, but they are always the exact same group of 4. Interestingly, one of these visions involves the historical Buddha Shakyamuni. You see him on the left there in classical Indian garb with his Ushanisha and his snail-like curls on his head. Another one of these visions focuses on, and it's a little bit difficult to see him, but this is Shad Akshari Avalokiteshvara, the guy whose mantra is Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. So that's who that is. And the other 2, the ones right here, involve fierce Vajrayana, or esoteric Buddhist deities. Right here, you see Chakrasamvara, which means controller of the bliss wheels. We've got a great sculpture up on the 3rd floor you should check out of Chakrasamvara. And Vajrayogini over here on the right with her fancy garland of skulls. See? By the way, we're going to be talking a lot about skull garlands in a minute, so just keep that in mind. That's a really interesting topic. Now here's something small, but crucially important. Do you see what this is? Hang on, I'm going to try to hold my hand still. Look familiar? This is the mysterious arched structure that I didn't describe in a previous slide. As it turns out, we know exactly what this mysterious art structure is. It is Tashipel's retreat hut at Taklung Monastery, which his guru, the mutton chop master Petmodrupa, told him to build in order to reach enlightenment. So, the message here, this is very interesting, the message here is that all of these visions took place within that shrine. And likely, these are appearances what did I write here? These appearances are not merely of these deities to Tashipel. So it's not like they're manifesting in front of him, but rather, this is Tashipel visualizing himself as these deities. So there are actually two forms of visualization. In one, you visualize the figure in front, and in another, you visualize yourself as that figure. And that's what's going on here, and that's what the reed shrine glyphs. Very, very interesting. Another thing that's interesting to me about this, just as an aside, is that this is almost a tableau of all three turnings of the wheel in Buddhism. Up here, the first turning of the wheel, Shakyamuni. Here's the Mahayana figure of Avalokiteshvara. And from the third turning, the Vajrayana, you've got Chakrasamvara and Vajrayogini. So all three traditions concentrated in one place. And Tashipel practicing all of those visions. You getting tired of high-flown metaphysical talk? Okay, good. There's still more. We'll get back to it. Now, not everything is high-flown, meditative metaphysics with no connection to the world of ordinary experience here in the painting. For, if we move to the area that's just underneath Tashipel's throne, we get a different perspective, that of ordinary reality. First, we see Tashipel's shrine. You see it right here? And here you see it frontally rather than in cross-section, as you were seeing in the previous images. You can see it arching over the central image here. Then we see Tashipel's shrine along with other buildings from his home monastery at Taklung. And that's what all of these buildings are right here. This one and this one as well. That's probably a Gompa, a meditation hall. So, the shrine here is not actually an abstract, philosophically informed space, but rather it is a concrete historical location. And so clearly, the visionary realm on the one hand and the historical realm on the other interpenetrate in this painting. History and vision, myth and ordinary reality, just like this. So far, so good. But if the monastery depiction derives from historically existent structures, there is an anomaly that will not escape you for long. What is that anomaly? If these structures are just historical, what's the anomaly? How many times do you see Tashipel? Okay, if this is ordinary history, why on earth is Tashipel appearing 5 more times in this same register? That is, well, I can give you a sort of an answer. What's going on here is that the painting is depicting Tashipel as present in multiple space-time locations in one painting. Time travel by Thangka. Now, we'll return to Tashipel's multiple appearances in a moment, but first, let's look at what the reed hut, after the reed hut, must have been one of the most important edifices at Taklung, the 2 golden stupas to the left. See them? Now, what might Tashipel have to do with these 2 stupas? Well, the one on the left likely depicts the stupa in which Tashipel and his relics were interred after his death in the year 1210. So that would be the first one. The next one is the stupa of his successor, a gentleman named Kuyalwa, you don't have to remember that, whom we shall also meet in a moment. As we shall see, stupas like this are really the key to establishing an authoritative monastic lineage at Taklung Monastery as elsewhere. To understand why this is the case, we need to understand a little bit about how the tashipel on the painting, you know, this guy, might be understood as inhabiting a stupa on the painting, which in fact he does. But how so? Well, the first clue appears on the front of the painting. The 4 smiling guardian kings represented in this slide hold the key. Note how they occupy a 4-square position. Wow, that could have been ugly. Note how they occupy a 4-square position around the edges of Tashipel's area. Now, this configuration, this 4-square configuration, has a very special function. Its 4-square form, X marks the spot, marks the center of the cosmos. And like all such centers, it has a profoundly vertical dimension as well. For the center in this system is also the summit. The center is the summit. Now, in the Buddhist world, this center and summit is marked by similar forms. One such form is the world mountain Sumeru. You can see this world mountain Sumeru in our magnificent Burmese shrine, which is currently on loan to the Asia Society in New York. And you can also see it in the Nepalese Swayambhu Stupa up in the third floor Himalayan galleries. Now, another cosmic center demarcated by the center and summit configuration is the reliquary mound called a stupa. Now, doctrinally, if not in actual practice, stupas are typically reserved to house the remains of advanced meditators. Now, since these remains are deemed to be saturated with the positive karmic force called punya, or merit, the enshrinement of these relics in a stupa gives the faithful ongoing access to the rebirth-determining potency accumulated in life by the deceased adept. So in other words, the adept has accumulated a great deal of merit, and after his or her death, interment in the stupa lets the faithful have access to that merit on an ongoing basis. Now, there's clearly a 4-fold center here, but is there a stupa? After all, if Tashipel really is a Buddha and a very advanced meditator, he ought to be enshrined in one. And if we turn the painting over, lo and behold, you'll see that he is enshrined in a stupa. See the red outlines? They're a little difficult to see, and I've messed with this photograph to try to bring them out, but I haven't succeeded. Do you see that red line? Describes the form of a stupa. Up and around. And then there's the tops, and then up here you see ribbons coming off of it. Old Thangka, but magnificent inscription. So these red lines describe the subtle form of the stupa with an inscription inside of it. And indeed, stupas drawn in this manner are a key and long-lasting feature of Taklung Thangka traditions above all others. But that, of course, is only part of the story. The inscription that you see here reveals traces of a ritual that took place centuries ago. A ritual called, if you'll excuse me, repne in Tibetan or abhisheka in Sanskrit. You don't have to remember that. What it is a consecration rite. And here's how it would have worked. First, the consecrating lama, we'll take this one as an example, would visualize the central figure, in this case Tashipel. Then that same lama would visualize the visualized image entering the painting at 3 points. Oh, entering the painting. Then finally, the consecrating lama will seal the visualized image into the painting at 3 points: the brow, the throat, and the heart, with 3 syllables: Om, Ah, Hum. And here I have indicated Tashipel's Om Ah Hum in magenta. Very tasteful. And if you look closely, you'll see that all the sacred images on the Thangka have similarly been sealed into the painting. Look here. See that? That is that. How about this? There's another Om Ah Hum, another sacred figure. And this is the same for all of the sacred figures on the Thangka. Finally, a series of consecration verses is written in the cursive Tibetan script called ume in the body of the text, and it's notoriously difficult to read, but we've got it. The inscription is enclosed within the red outlines of the stupa, and it consists most importantly of a phrase we call the Ye Dharma phase, which isn't necessarily Ye Dharma, but something else. The Ye Dharma phrase translates as, "The Lord," meaning the Buddha, "has declared the causes of those things that have a cause, and he has also set forth the manner of their cessation." Now, philosophically, this phrase is understood as the fundamental thought form of the Buddha. This is the content of the Buddha's mind. More concretely, or I should say ritually, it serves to transform whatever it's inscribed upon into a virtual stupa. Its presence here means that Tashi Pel's visualized presence has now been sealed inside a virtual stupa. And so we can say that Tashi Pel is in the painting, both visually and ritually, iconically and performatively, in two different ways. So let me give you a brief aside. We're going to go into the galleries for just a second, virtually. Note that this formula does in fact appear throughout the galleries in the Asian, but especially in realms Pala, galleries 1 and 2. On the left, you see one of our masterworks, B60S 598. And the Buddha here is thinking. Can you guess what that inscription says? Oh, I bet you can. Ye Dharma. So that's what the Buddha's thinking. It's that same phrase. This same Ye Dharma formula appears beneath the stupa on this Buddha image. You know this Buddha image that separates gallery 1 and 2? That's the reverse, and I'm sure you've all seen it. That's the Ye Dharma phrase on the back of it, in an apparent stone anticipation of the later practice of Tibetan Thangka painters. Very interesting. And the import is this. Because the formula is in place, the object has become a receptacle for the time-transcending power of the Buddha's thought. Now back to paintings. Now, what's really interesting in the Tashi Pel painting, like Tashi Pel himself in the painting, is that the painting itself, the actual physical painting, has been understood as having once resided in an actual physical stupa, the physical embodiment of the time-transcending power of the Buddha's thought. In particular, he once resided in an architectural stupa I showed you a few slides ago that once existed at Taklung Monastery. This one. Together with the stupa next to it, these are the reliquaries of the first two Taklung abbots, Tashi Pel on the one hand and Kuyalwa on the other. The gentleman on the left in this painting, there's Kuyalwa. Good, I labeled it. But this other guy, Sangye Yarjan, is Kuyalwa's successor. His stupa, though, do you see it here? It does not appear in the painting. Consequently, we can date the painting's execution to before Sangye Yarjan's death, which occurred in 1273, but after Tashi Pel's death in 1210. So if you go up to the galleries and you see the dating, that's how we arrived at that dating. Now, stupas of this type are exactly where one might expect to deposit a Thangka, such as this, probably as part of the stupa's consecration ceremonies. And that's why some early scholars speculated that the Taklung paintings came from the stupas at Taklung Monastery. It seems fairly logical. And accordingly, they dated these paintings all to the 14th century. But there is a big problem. Taklung was entirely destroyed by fire in 1548. Gone. This, of course, makes it extremely unlikely that the painting came straight from a stupa deposit at Taklung. Instead, we've been able to determine on incontrovertible internal evidence that the painting came not from Taklung, that first monastery I showed you, but instead from the second monastery I showed you, a place called Riwoche, which you saw in the first slide. And here is where the story gets really crazy. Now, to appreciate the story, yeah, you think it could get crazier? To appreciate the story, you'll need to know at the outset that Tashi-Pel, like all Tibetan Buddhist masters, is one link, albeit a crucial one, in a chain of doctrinal transmission and institutional authority. This is a virtual lineage that series of stupas, like the two we just saw, actually make physically tangible. And it's the integrity of this chain that's the subject matter that appears at the top register of the Tashi-Pel painting, which I have reproduced for you right here. Here, you'll see the succession of masters of the Kagyu, or oral tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, whose practices Tashi-Pel inherited and transmitted. And in this slide, I've numbered the members of this lineage according to their position in the chain. First comes the blue Buddha Vajradhara, from whom all of these fierce teachings would have emanated. He's got his hands crossed over his chest in Vajrahumkara posture. And if you want to see another Vajradhara in the museum, please go to the Qing galleries and you'll see a great dry lacquer of this same figure. Moving to the left, we see two Indian adepts, and you can see that they're dressed for a warm climate, here and here. That's Tilopa and Niropa. Moving back to the right, gurus 4, 5, and 6. Those are, respectively, the knobby-headed Marpa, the white-robed Milarepa, and the balding Gampopa. And of course, you see the guru in the center. Do you see his trademark mutton chops? Yeah, that's Tashi-Pel's guru, Pekmo Drupa, with that interesting beard. Now, apart from the fact that counting generations in this way is perhaps the most powerful means of dating Tibetan paintings at our disposal, it highlights something else, the absolutely crucial role that lineal transmission and succession plays in the practice of Vajrayana Buddhism in Tibet. For without such a lineage, one neither has the qualifications to practice nor the authority to direct the practices of others. And it is precisely a dispute about lineage and transmission that catalyzed a change of venue for our Tashi-Pel painting. Here's how it started, and to make a long and involved story short in 3 easy steps, let's go to the next slide. How we doing? Excellent. First, in 1182, Tashi-Pel's guru Pekmo Drupa, the mutton chop master, the small image at the top of this painting, he told Tashi-Pel to build that reed meditation hut. The place would soon become Taklung Monastery, one of the wealthiest and most important in Tibet. After Tashi-Pel's death, his successor and nephew enshrined his remains in a stupa at the location, as we have seen. Sangye Yarjon succeeded Kuyalwa as the third guru, and in turn performed the stupa ceremonies for his mentor in the second of the gold stupas that we were examining. Now, under ideal conditions, each successive stupa would attest to the continued integrity of the lineage. But during this period, there were dangerous political and military intrigue afoot in Tibet. Pardon me, was dangerous intrigue afoot. For at this time, none other than Kublai Khan was busy trying to bring all of Asia to heel, including Tibet. Now, the Great Khan's approach to conquest was first to ask for submission, then to take hostages, then to appoint an indigenous head of state if his terms were met. And in the case of Tibet, the indigenous head of state would turn out to be a famous gentleman named Pekpa. Pekpa was first hostage to the Khan. He later became abbot of Sakya Monastery, then the Yuan dynasty imperial preceptor, and finally, at long last, regent of Tibet. Now, as it turns out, Pekpa was a close associate of Sangye Yarjon, that third guru. And at Pekpa's request, Sangye Yarjon sent his nephew, a guy named Mangalaguru, you don't have to remember that, to the Khan as a hostage. Now, since Mangalaguru was, in virtue of his seniority, de facto heir to the abbacy at Taklung, his absence left a vacancy in the monastery's lineal succession. So, in Mangalaguru's absence, Sangye Yarjon appointed another of his nephews as interim abbot, a 21-year-old man named Anpo. The year was 1272, and it would unfortunately turn out to be Sangye Yarjon's last. Upon his demise, Anpo conducted his funeral rites and interred Sangye Yarjon in a stupa that would become the third at Taklung. Shortly thereafter, however, Mangalaguru, you remember the guy who was the hostage? He returned to Taklung from the Khan's court. And once there, Mangalaguru took over the abbacy from the younger Anpo. He displaced him. Anpo took this turn of events badly, as you might expect, and determined to leave Taklung and found his own monastery. However, Anpo had been instructed by Sangye Yarjon, oops, he's not there, he's in the previous slide, his uncle, to, quote, never part with the holy relics of Taklung. He had made that promise. So Anpo found himself in a bit of a double bind, which he solved by taking a large number of sacred objects, including Thangkas and including this one, from Taklung Monastery and into eastern Tibet, where he founded the monastery of Rinpoche, which you see right here. And one of the first orders of his business appears to have centered on the disposition of sacred objects that he brought with him from Taklung, and in particular, their reconsecration. Now, now, how can we possibly know this? Well, one source of information is textual. The ecclesiastical history of Tibet, something called the Blue Annals. This record tells us that Anpo reconsecrated a number of sacred objects in 1273, the year he left Taklung. But another is much more immediate and less subject to the vagaries of editing and transmission and all that. That source is none other than the Tashipel Thangka itself. For as fate would have it, the Tashipel Thangka bears Anpo's reconsecration inscription, the very one that the Blue Annals suggest must be there. And right here you can see it. It reads very simply, Taklung Pai Anpo Lama Rinpoche Pelgi Repne Juk. Literally, the consecration was undertaken by the Taklung Lama Anpo Rinpoche. And a lot of other Taklung paintings have this inscription as well, but not all of them. And the presence or absence of this formula allows us to identify paintings that were made at Taklung and taken to Rinpoche, and other, often quite similar paintings that were made at Rinpoche, either as copies of earlier paintings or as new compositions. As a result, when we look at the corpus in as much of its entirety as possible, we get the impression that, wait for it, Tashipel existed in multiple art historical time horizons. Early in the case of our Tashipel, and later in the case of subsequent versions or copies that do not bear this inscription. Which is interesting, because Tashipel was understood, just like his teacher, the mutton chop master Pekmo Drupa, to be able to manifest in multiple space-time locations at once. And that, as you'll recall, is exactly what we see happening in the Tashipel painting. For in this one painting, we see Tashipel in no fewer than 7 separate times and places. In the side columns, just above the lower directional guardians, here, 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 and here, and in the Taklung Monastery tableau, looking out face-forward Tashipel style from 5 different monastery windows, including from his reed hut, right here as we've seen. Now, what exactly is at stake here remains a mystery that only further research will reveal. As I suggested, it's likely that it has something to do with Tashipel's Buddha-like ability to be simultaneously present in multiple space-time locations. So, are we in the Matrix? Has Tashipel replicated himself like Mr. Smith? Well, from a religious studies point of view, the strongest hypothesis is that these images record Tashipel's appearances across time. He can appear in this way because he, like a Buddha, or maybe as a Buddha, has completely transcended time and is thus able to appear in multiple space-time locations. So again, to use the science fiction metaphor, Perhaps Tashipel is like Kurt Vonnegut's Billy Pilgrim from Slaughterhouse-Five. He's unstuck in time, but deeply involved with history. A very interesting situation to be in, and something that he shares with a gentleman we'll meet very shortly, a man known as Guru Rinpoche, or Padmasambhava. But first, let's look at a painting that by inscription certainly was made at Rinpoche. Here we can understand how Anpo understood himself as unstuck in time. How we doing? Okay. Yeah, let's go ahead and take a break right now.